On paper, it sounded great. You went to Harvard for college, you'd gone to Harvard Business School. The credentials all sounded great, but there you were sitting in the cubicle feeling like a failure.
I think we're at a moment in America now where this is relevant to a lot of people. There's many examples of rich, famous people who are miserable and have addictions and really want to change their lives.
Half of Hollywood.
Exactly.
This is about the Tuskegee Airmen in World War II. They were the first black military airmen. The Germans treated them better than the Americans.
As prisoners of war, yes. The only place where they got prejudice from were from their own people.
10 years out of Harvard Business School, Hugh Taylor felt he had hit rock bottom. His website design company had failed, and he found himself doing inside sales at a software company in a little tiny cubicle. Only then he realized failure could drive a personal and business transformation. He went on to work for Microsoft and IBM and is now a successful executive for a software company. He tells us how he did it. He's author of The Life Reset. And later in the show, Stan Weisleder on the Tuskegee Airmen, the fighter pilots who were the first black military airmen in World War II. But up first, Hugh Taylor. Pleasure to have you here today, Hugh.
How are you?
Well, when we talked the other day, you said you almost called this Failure the Owner's Manual.
That's right. That was the original title for the book because I felt that failure, which is something that I have experienced in a number of times in my life, is such a common experience, but there's so few guides to how to handle it. So I thought, why not have an owner's manual? But that title, I think, was a little too much, so we decided to call it The Life Reset.
I guess it has a little more positive sound to it.
Right.
But you know, I love the fact, though, that well, number one, I think a lot of people can relate to it, not only with the economy, but just, you know, changing careers, whatever, or things that, you know, because on paper it sounded great. I mean, you went to Harvard for college, you'd gone to Harvard Business School, you know, the credentials all sounded great, but there you were sitting in the cubicle feeling like a failure. So, you know, even people who sound great on paper sometimes may not feel that, because you know what, you're looking at the classmates, what everybody's done or something, and you know, you felt you said you felt like you were 10 years behind maybe where you should be.
Yes, I was 37 years old and sort of basically at more or less an entry level again, and had to make up for lost time. And you know, I think we're at a moment in America now where this is relevant to a lot of people. You know, unemployment is high. American companies are sitting on almost $2 trillion in cash, but they're not hiring. And I think that this issue comes up for a lot of people, which is, what is it going to take for you to be as successful as you want to be, as you're meant to be?
And even what is success, which I think people are also grappling with.
Well, I think, you know, in my experience, I work with people who had problems and try and help them figure them out. And my impression is that there's really one reason that people fail. I mean, some people have bad luck. Okay, you can have bad luck, like there's a tsunami or something that wipes out your house or something, but mostly people
But if you're always having bad luck.
Right, well, there are people who are prone to bad luck. Yeah, that's when you really have to look, because what I think happens is that people who have failures and setbacks in their career, or who are in a career where they're ostensibly successful but feel miserable, which is also, in my view, a form of failure, or a setback where people should want to do the work, or they may want to seek an answer and how to feel better.
Well, when you hear about AA membership and stuff, I think that's more common than people may realize too, by the way.
Yes.
A lot of those doctors and attorneys and even Wall Street people aren't necessarily always happy campers. But.
Oh, absolutely. And there's many examples of rich, famous people who are miserable and have addictions and really want to change their lives. But
half of Hollywood.
Exactly. We're in the right town. But you know, the one thing that really drives this in so many cases is people are doing the wrong thing in their life. They're doing something that isn't right for them. And it's like a story. I had a friend who was interviewing for a job, and it just sounded like the best job in the world. And she went to see a man who was a mentor of hers, and that's something I definitely encourage people to do, is find someone you can talk to, who you trust. And she explained this job to him, and he said, that sounds like the opportunity of a lifetime, just not your lifetime. And that is so critical. And for me, I was, you know, with the best of intentions, pursuing businesses and careers that weren't really suited for me.
Right, well, you had that same situation, right? You actually had, since we were mentioning Hollywood, you had dove in and had reached a certain level in Hollywood, but discovered that wasn't your cup of tea.
Exactly. My job, originally I was an assistant, so I made a lot of Xerox copies and bought cigars and stuff like that. And then I became a development executive for TV movies. So my job was to call crime victims and ask if I could buy their rights. So that was me, you know. I would call, hi, I'm so sorry that your father was murdered, but we can make a movie about it, and Eric Estrada can play you. You know, it was not a good job for me, and so I had to get out. So I went into the technology business, and that turned out to be a colossal failure. But the challenge for me, and I don't want to make this sound easy because it was awful, was to look at that failure as a gift and say, this is a moment when I have to figure out what it is I'm meant to be doing in my life. What am I going to be good at?
And by the way, I love all the quotes you have throughout the book too, by the way, from very well-known people, famous people, successful people, you know, talking about how the fact that basically all of them experience failure at some point, or, you know, just how common it is.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, some of the most famous and successful people have had failures. In fact, I mean, Abraham Lincoln once said, show me a man who's never failed, and I'll show you a man who's never tried anything. And Thomas Edison said the same thing. So show me a totally happy and contented man, I'll show you a failure. So people who are successful had to try and fail and learn from their mistakes.
So there you are sitting in the cubicle thinking, this really sucks. So what did you do about it? How did you...
Well, I had what I call a moment of truth, which is I felt like the cubicle was getting smaller and smaller, and the lights were getting dimmer and dimmer, and I thought, I'm 37 years old, I just bought a house, we just had our first child, my business went under, I called it the failure trifecta.
Yeah, and I think literally, like, there have been studies, those three things, like if you get married, buy a house, have a kid or something, that's like from a pressure point of view or something, they say that's like, let alone the business, I think all of that's like, yeah, that is, even just from a psychological point of view, that's supposed to be heavy stuff.
I was having, all really in the same time, and I just thought, I'm going to die in this cubicle. And so what I had to do, and what I decided to do, it's an experience that I describe in the book as a sort of a process, but I had to sort of discover it on my own. And I had some outside help and some mentors as well, is to really look at what did I enjoy doing and what was I good at. And so for a definition of success, for me was, how am I going to feel better about myself and make more money? Those are the two things. And I've, thank God, been able to do that. It took a while. I had to make a lot of mistakes. There were a lot of false steps on the way, but I like to call them intelligent mistakes because I figured out this is what I want to do. And I'll give you an example.
Sure.
I have some facility for photography and design and that kind of thing. So I thought, I'm going to stop trying to be a businessman. I'm not really a big business executive guy, even though I went to Harvard Business School. I'm going to focus on something which I like to do, which is photography. So I had this idea. I was going to start a business taking pictures of people who placed personal ads. It'll be like your official portrait for your personal ad. So I went,
like your Facebook photo.
Exactly. So this was 10 years ago. And actually, a friend of mine had asked me to take his picture for personal. I said, oh, perfect business. I'm going to do this. I bought a digital camera for $100. I went out. I got 2 clients. One of them wouldn't pay me. Another one paid me $20. And then I just realized it was a completely idiotic idea.
Might not be the best business model.
Yeah, it was a real vision, you know. But you know what? It's the best $80 I ever lost because I had gone into something thinking this is what I'm good at. I tried it. It didn't work. And one of the biggest discoveries at that point was, and this was after I, had gotten this low-level job and everything, was I made a mistake, I failed, and I'm still breathing. It's okay. I'm going to be okay.
One of the quotes in the book was it Mike Ditka, I think, said something like, success is temporary, but failure isn't fatal, or something like that.
Right.
Nobody dies, or shouldn't, in most cases.
And you're going to feel, this is one thing I talk about in the book, and people have problems, and I know this firsthand, and I know this from people I work with. It's going to feel terrible. And you have to give yourself time. It's almost like a grieving process. Get through it. And the problem, though, is you have to do, as a colleague of mine said, it's like changing the tire while the car is moving. You still have to, make a living, be a human being, be a parent, be a spouse, whatever. But if you want to do it, you have to sort of let yourself grieve and do the work of rebuilding yourself.
We'll be right back. And we are back with Hugh Taylor. He's author of The Life Reset. So you talk about the self-assessment. Can you tell me kind of more specifically, what you did or what other people can do when they're, facing that? As you said, granted it's tough, changing the tire when how do you change the tire when the car is moving?
Well, I think like this type of process works best if you can figure out what's wrong and then fix it. It seems obvious. And all these great concepts are, but it's a lot harder to do in reality. In the book, I have some sort of diagnostic tests to figure out, just on the one level, how bad is your situation? Are you just having like a bad day? Because sometimes if you're depressed and you have a bad day, you might think, I'm a failure, my life is terrible. Are you really having a problem, Or is it just a situation where your life hasn't worked out the way you wanted to, even though ostensibly, like I work with someone, she's a doctor, she makes a lot of money, she hates her life, you know, so you look from the outside, you're like, wow, look at that person. She doesn't want to be a doctor. She wants to do something else. So figuring out, going through, you know, what is it, how do you feel about situations? And what I've learned is that sometimes your body can tell you things that your mind won't tell you. Because sometimes the rationalizations we have about ourselves are so deep. Like, for example, in this case, like, this person was told that being a doctor was the ultimate job in life, right?
Sure.
And it's a great
Probably from parents from day one.
Right.
I know so many people like that.
Right. So, you know, she had to go into a quiet place and actually say the statement, I am supposed to be a doctor, and feel her body kind of told her, like, that doesn't feel right. It just, something clenched up inside her. So she knew, that was one technique that I recommend. So she thought, I got to do something else with my life. And so she's worked on, but now she can't just drop everything and sail around the world. You know, she's going to have to do a process.
Like they say in the movie or something that comes, honey, I quit my job. Or, you know,
right, exactly.
I'm not a doctor anymore. Screw it, I just gave it all up, you know.
Right. Well, you know, look, for some people, that's the best thing to do. It's not a. I'm a big realist and pragmatist. You know, I think that, you know, for example, some people say, you know, chase your dreams, you know, go for it, and that can be great in some cases, but it's not always the best plan. And you know, like in my situation, I have a family. You know, I can't just drop everything and do whatever I want. So
without getting too personal, or I'll let you decide how personal. But I mean, is it tough because, again, like you said, you know, you got to pay the mortgage. I mean, your spouse might be there looking like, you know, honey, what's going on, or you know, or are we going to pay the mortgage, or you know, I mean, you know, how do people handle that kind of pressure too, you know, and you have to maybe keep everybody happy besides yourself. Yeah.
It's very challenging, and I don't know if you can keep everybody happy. You know, I think that, I mean, for example, just in practical terms, let's say your work environment is not great, and you want to change it, and your home life is having issues. You might just want to, you know, make a gentle evolution in your work life, unless it's some total nightmare, because otherwise you're going to exacerbate your home situation. That's going to get worse, and these things go back and forth on each other. You can't be chipper and happy in the office if your home life is miserable.
But it sounds as though you had support at home. I mean, it was really the work issue.
Yeah, I mean, no, I'm very blessed, you know, with family. I have a good faith and everything. So, yeah, and I think you have to find support wherever you can, through mentors, friends, family, and that type of thing.
Well, and when we were talking on the phone, and as you've also touched on some here today, you know, I just think again that you can ask what is happiness or what is success, and as we do in college and philosophy, but I think a lot of people face that because we do put a lot of pressure on ourselves to have a certain job or make a certain amount of money or become a doctor, you know, all those things that make mommy and daddy happy or society happy. But well, as I told you the other day on the phone, when I was talking to somebody who had been traveling to Africa and India and came across a lot of poverty in those places, and I said, well, you know, is that depressing to see all of those people living into poverty? And he said, well, you know, well, not really, because a lot of them didn't realize they weren't supposed to be happy. I mean, they had a more basic life than we do. I mean, I mean people who were starving to death, but they didn't know they weren't supposed to be happy with the, you know, maybe the smaller house or something. You know, they had their family and stuff and whatever. They didn't have the job on Wall Street, but they didn't know that that's what you needed to be happy. So,
yeah, we often get influenced by factors that we're not even aware of, and I think one big culprit is institutions. For example, you know, I went to a famous business school, and that I got a message that you have to, the way one should be, you should be, you know, making $500,000 a year, driving Mercedes, you know, have a Rolex watch. Then that's what you've got it going on, and you know. I used to say, like, you know, that there's 50,000 alumni of the Harvard Business School out there, but there's only 500 Fortune 500 companies. So how many Fortune 500 CEOs can there be? There's going to be 49,500 disappointed people. So you have to figure out what it is that's affecting you, and it could be parents, could be friends, even the media, you know, the images you see on TV about what a successful person looks like, advertising, it's all very influential. So you have to sort of strip that away. And it's not easy to do, and it can take iterations. You have to go through this a few times. And I still, myself, it's not like I'm perfect. I mean, I still, sometimes I see someone with a cool car, I'm like, that should be my car, right? Not a Toyota Corolla. But and then I know I'm
Well,
supposed
it's
to-
hard, right? You know, you get updates from the Alumni Association, as you mentioned in the book, you know, like you see what everybody else is doing, and I guess, well, as they say, keeping up with the Joneses and stuff
Right.
too, you know, we're all looking around, seeing what everybody's doing. You know,
Oh,
and,
absolutely. I mean, when I was in my cubicle, you know, one friend of mine was the president of the Gap. Another one was a senior partner at a major Wall Street firm. And, you know, whatever. These were really successful people. And there was some pain in that, understanding like that's not going to be my destiny. My destiny is for me to do something that I'm good at. And it's worked because I'm making more money than I ever made before. Because I focused on what I'm good at and what I was meant to be doing in my life, which involves being creative, writing, teaching, that kind of thing.
Now, since we were talking about some of the credentials, since you also worked at Microsoft and IBM, I mean, that was kind of also a transitional period for you, or I think, you know, it wasn't your... You moved on to other things, and I think, you know, and what did you... It wasn't the final destination, I guess is what I'm trying to say. You know, it was one step along the way. And what did that teach you, again, too, that, you know, you didn't have to... You went on for Microsoft, IBM, and I think we're laid off at IBM,
Yes.
and now have, you know, are successful at a software company, but...
Well, you know, I think that one thing I decided that I needed big company experience for my training and everything. So I went to Microsoft. I had a good time and a terrible time at the same time. I learned a tremendous amount. And the funny thing is I learned the most from people who I didn't get along with. So I had this attitude like, this is crazy, but I'm going to learn a lot. Then I went to IBM, also learned a lot, got laid off after 7 months in March of 2009. I'm sitting there again, but the difference between then and my previous experience was I was prepared. I knew what I was good at. I knew how to present myself, and it wasn't such a disaster. So my suggestion is that people look at setbacks as an opportunity to learn about themselves. And one thing I learned at big companies was I'm not a big company kind of guy. I like what I learned there, and it's helpful. I work at a small software company now. I know how to deal with a big software company. I used to be one. But I'm suited to a smaller environment, more startup, entrepreneurial environment.
Well, I love the quote that they used to have in college a lot, which was, as Nietzsche said, that which does not kill you makes you stronger. So I don't know if that was exactly the message, but I think it's somewhere along that line. So thank you very much, Hugh Taylor. The book is The Life Reset. We'll be right back. And we are back. Joining me now is Stan Weisleder, author of Wings of the Panther, which I guess is also now being retitled.
Yes, because this book happens to be out of print. So it's being republished by Chaucer Press and to be distributed by University Press. And we have a new title and a new cover and some updates.
And what's the new title?
A Killer of Lions.
Okay, A Killer of Lions. Now this is about the Tuskegee Airmen in World War II. They were the first black military airmen in the U.S. Army?
In the U.S. Army Air Corps during World War II.
Okay. And, well, actually, there was a movie made about this, too, wasn't there?
It was an HBO movie about 10 years ago.
And you've written a novel based on them.
Yes. People ask me, is it real? Is it fiction? I like to call it faction.
Faction. Inspired by true events, as they say.
Yes, everything in there did happen, perhaps in a different way, shape, or form, a little different timelines to make it more convenient for telling the story. And a lot of my characters, the main characters, are composites of 3, 4, maybe even 5 people. And in some instances, I use real names with real people.
Well, I think, you know, what drew me to this subject was I think that, well, I've always been fascinated by World War II, or I think, you know, today obviously it was a huge world event and people are still, you know, trying to come to grips with it in a lot of ways. But it's a unique story as well, because here these guys are fighting for America, but yet facing racial discrimination in the military and at home. So, you know, fighting for freedom, truth, justice, freedom, the American way, but being treated by like shit, if I can say so.
It's your station, you can say whatever you like.
We may bleep that, you know, but okay.
Well, it's interesting what you mentioned, because they did not experience any prejudice from the Allies that they fought with, nor from the enemy for those that were captured. And there were about a dozen guys that did get shot down and were captured.
By the Germans?
By the Germans. They
So you're saying the Germans treated them better than the Americans?
Yes.
As prisoners of war.
As prisoners of war, yes. The only place where they got the prejudice from were from their own people, their own country.
Wow, so even the European allies were more...
The allies and the enemy were more respectful.
And what kind of things did happen? For instance, I mean, I know they were the usual slurs like the N-word and that sort of thing, but they couldn't use certain drinking fountains and all this
Separate
stuff?
bathrooms, separate drinking fountains, and even after the war, if somebody came back with wings on his chest, a lot of ribbons and medals, and quite clearly an officer, and they would get on the bus down south. It was, get to the back of the bus.
Wow.
Boy.
Wow. That would really be something to come back from something heroic in the war and then being told, get back to the back of the bus, boy.
Yeah, it happened.
Wow. And they had a pretty amazing record too, though. Well, and I should say, going first also on the discrimination side, a lot of the white bomber pilots apparently at first did not want them to guard them, but later came around.
At first, they did not want them because they didn't think that they were up to it, that they were inferior, but then they found out that they did not leave their side. One of the things that a lot of the white pilots did, if they saw a German plane nearby, they would quickly take off and try to shoot it down to get a victory, because that's what looked good on your record, victories. But the Tuskegee pilots, and originally the 99th Fighter Squadron and later the 332nd Fighter Group, they were told by their leader, you do not leave a bomber, ever, no matter what. You're one, they are 10 people in there. So you will stay as close as possible and you will never leave their side. And then, because of that, the bomber crews, who were all white, would specifically put in for the black pilots.
The guys who aren't going to fly away.
Exactly.
Very interesting. Now, and they were mostly, what sort of missions did they run? Was it over Italy and Germany? Or?
Over Germany, Italy, what is now Serbia and so forth, Yugoslavia, to the Ploesti oil fields, Czechoslovakia, all over the European theater. They started out in North Africa and then worked their way up to Italy and all over.
Now, I believe their commander, you have to correct, you're the expert, was Benjamin O. Davis?
Benjamin O. Davis Jr. Can't forget the Jr. because his father was Benjamin O. Davis Sr., who was the first black general. He was a one-star general, but Junior made it up to a three-star general.
And he was the first West Point graduate, junior?
He was the second, well, there was a West Point graduate back around in the 1800s, African-American, okay, back in the previous century, in the 19th century, maybe around, I don't know the year, but you could look it up. And he was the second one. His father never graduated West Point. His father made it as an officer the hard way by taking competitive examinations and worked his way up the hard way. But Benjamin O. Davis Jr. did go to West Point. He graduated in 1936 after putting up with 4 years of the silent treatment. That means nobody spoke to him.
Oh my God. So the entire time at West Point?
They did not talk to him. The only time somebody would talk to him was if he was given a direct order, like do this, do that, sit here, move there. He had his own room. Nobody would bunk with him.
Oh my God.
When they went on maneuvers, which they are required to do, he had his own tent. Nobody would care to be with him.
Wow. I'm just trying to imagine that, going to school for 4 years and having everyone go out of their way to not talk to you.
And then when he heard about the aviation program started by President Roosevelt in 1941, he was one of the applicants. And 13 people went into that class, 5 of whom graduated. He was one of them. And because he was already an officer, he was made commanding officer of the 1st unit. And as the experiment turned out to be more than an experiment, they thought they would all fall flat on their faces. They kept graduating more pilots, and before you knew it, 1 squadron became 4 squadrons.
Meaning more black pilots, of course.
More black pilots, and they were all in one group, the 332nd Fighter Group. But what's curious, first it was the 99th Fighter Squadron, and they were assigned to a white fighter group. And when 3 more squadrons were created, they created the 332nd Fighter Group, which is normally 3 squadrons in a fighter group. But the powers that be took the 99th Fighter Squadron from the white fighter group and moved them over to the black or African American fighter group, giving them 4 squadrons in a fighter group, which was unusual. There were only supposed to be 3.
Wow,
So the members of the 99th, they said this is discrimination. But they did well as a very well integrated group. They had a good leader, B.O. Davis. Well, he was hard on his men. His attitude was, you not only have to be good, you have to be better than the white man.
Well, thank you very much. An amazing story from World War II and kind of an unfortunate, inspiring but also unfortunate period in American history. The new book is Killer of Lions.
Killer of Lions. It'll be out in November.
All right, and thanks also to Hugh Taylor, The Life Reset. Thanks everybody for watching. We'll see you next time.
Okay. Thank you.